Hello, travellers. I'm Jo Francis Penn, and today I'm here with Oliver Smith. Hi, Ollie.
Hello, how are you doing?
Oh, it's great to have you on the show. Just a little introduction. Ollie is a multi award winning travel writer and author of The Atlas of Abandoned Places and On This Holy Island, a modern pilgrimage across Britain, which we're talking about today. Fantastic book. Now, Ollie, I wanted to get straight into it. So, you say in the book, although you've travelled all over the world, you say, quote from the book, what interested me now were those places that promised a kind of travel beyond what could be charted on an ink or pixel map. So I wondered if you could start with that, because you've been to all these tick list travel places. What about these soulful journeys?
I guess what really interests me is that a lot of these places that feature in the book, they sort of live double lives. You know, if I were to pick one at random or one near where you are in the country, if we think about Glastonbury, for example, it's fascinating because people go there with such huge expectation. For some people, it's a place that kind of unlocks other worlds to them. The tour might be a portal to some world of the fairies or some world of Arthurian legend, or it might be something to do with Joseph of Arimathea and Jesus Christ walking in Somerset and that old legend. You know, so much is invested in it. Yet at the same time, Glastonbury is a place where if you go to the high street, there's a Boots, there is a pub selling the usual repertoire of kind of lagers and warm beers and Nobby's nuts behind the bar. You know, these places, I think all of them to some degree in the book, they are ordinary, mundane places that people live in and people pass by every day, but then they offer, they promise a kind of an extra level, which is detectable to some people and isn't to others. So it's that kind of, yeah, duality, I think, what really interested me when I was writing this book.
Yeah, and I guess what it's almost a bigger question, because when you look at your career as a travel writer, and you mentioned their expectation, which I think is a fantastic word for so much of travel. You could pick any of the tick list places in the world
Mm,
and say, well, that would be amazing, and then perhaps it's not. I always think of Venice, because I
mm,
went to Venice one winter and it flooded and it stank, and it was like it was
mm.
meant to be amazing, but it wasn't. So I did really just wonder, like, why write for you a pilgrimage book when you have traveled so many wonderful places?
Well, I think one thing that can be said about all the places I visited in this book is that they are places where you learn an awful lot about humanity and the human condition. People often gravitate to pilgrimage places at these kind of weightless moments of their lives when they're sort of on a hinge. Perhaps they've lost someone who was dear to them. Perhaps they've been made redundant. Perhaps they're looking for direction. They're going through a rite of passage, but they are often people who are quick to tell you their story. They're quick to open their heart. And I found myself getting in such deep and involving and fascinating conversations with people. I think my pilgrimage book is possibly a little bit different to a lot of the other ones that are out there in that it's not really about me. I'm more of a kind of, I'd say more of a witness, perhaps. I'm not, well, I wouldn't go as far as to say that these places didn't have some magic that kind of, that I felt on some level, but I think it's primarily about looking about at these 12 places as sort of different characters, as well as being characterful places. They are rich in characters themselves. So yeah, I think you will have the best conversations if you go to wherever it might be, Walsingham on a pilgrimage day or Stonehenge solstice or whatever it might be.
Hmm. Well, one of the places that you went is Lindisfarne, and I love that you slept in the rescue box. Now, I've walked across the sands. It was one of the highlights of the St. Cuthbert's Way. I had just a wonderful time. But tell us about that, because it's not a usual thing to do.
I think what makes Lindisfarne really interesting is its geography. That tidal element to Lindisfarne is something that's not entirely unique because you also get it at St Michael's Mount. You also get it at a couple of holy islands in the Severn Estuary, I think, as well. But on that scale, the idea of taking a walk of 3 miles across a path that twice a day is completely submerged is quite a wonderful thing. And I think I wrote in the book that I think that path has many lessons. The idea that you only have a finite amount of time, the idea that you need to make the best of that time. That's a sort of uh, something that's instructive for life, much bigger level. And but I think probably what's more interesting is the element of vulnerability there. You know, the idea that you are walking across the sea and the sea will be coming back for you very shortly, and you run the risk every time you step onto that path. And it's fascinating how there's this sort of like perpetual drumbeat through the summer of stories of people getting stuck on the causeway. It can be someone often who's got some quite flashy car and they think they can go straight through it and then they go in the drink sort of halfway across. It's also quite often people who are from countries where there aren't tides. So people from Central Europe, even the Mediterranean, you know, people sort of drive halfway across the causeway and they think it's a car parking space and they go for a little wander and they come back and the sea's risen again. Suddenly their car is a steering wheel deep in water. But there's so much biblical symbology in that, you know, the idea of the floods, the idea of the seas parting for Moses. I think all of that kind of echoes very slightly around the Lindisfarne Causeway, both the tarmac road and the Pilgrims Way. I think all those things are important. I mean, I guess the other thing to say is at the start of it all, St Aidan chose Lindisfarne because of this tidal rhythm, because there's these hours where the island is closed off from the world, and the monks there would be in their solitude, they would be praying. And then there are those hours where the door opens in a way, and they can go out into the world, they can spread the word. So it's not an accident that the monastery is sited there. I think the one thing that is absolutely extraordinary about Lindisfarne that just doesn't get spoken about enough is that almost every weekend or every other weekend in summer, maybe that's a bit too much, maybe every other weekend or once a month, something like that, a car will go under in the causeway, and these people will be in the car. The water will be going up. They'll be calling the RNLI. They'll probably be in a panic. The RNLI will turn up in their lifeboat, and then they'll fish them out, and they'll go back to sea houses, and their car will be absolutely kaput. And it's even a cottage industry. There's a little garage by the causeway that seems to sort of. I mean, it seemed to me that their business was essentially going out there, picking up the car and dragging it back. But in living memory, there's no record of anyone ever having drowned, and you see how fast that water moves, and you see how dangerous it can be, and you see how clueless people are. And there were a few people who did sort of weigh it over in their minds and say to me, well, that is almost miraculous, the fact that nobody has ever come a cropper there in living memory, or even I think even longer than that. I think there was sort of a muttering of something having happened 100 years ago, but it's quite extraordinary how that's the case.
Hmm. So I got to come back to the box because in we
Mm.
can picture this in our
Sure.
minds. So just
Mm.
sort of explain what the walk looks like and what is the box and the poles and
Sure,
everything.
sure. Sorry, I got carried away there. So
No, it's
you
good.
go across the causeway, and say you're going out at low tide. It sort of looks almost like a little bit of a desert. And then you've got the two routes: the Pilgrim's Way, which is the walking path, which sort of goes in a straight line, and then the metalled causeway, which is for cars. And on both of them, you find these shelters. On the Pilgrim's Way, it almost looks a bit like a tree house without a tree, as it were. This sort of like rickety, kind of slightly precarious platform on stilts that's designed that if you get caught by the tide, you can rush up there and you can wait it out. But on the metal causeway where the cars are, I think just by the deepest point, but just by the point where people tend to get stuck, they've essentially put what looks like a garden shed on stilts,
Hmm.
and that hovers by quite a deep channel. So it is this really weird thing that looks like someone's sort of taken their garden shed from B&Q or from home base or wherever, and they've propped it on four concrete legs and stuck it sort of up in the sky, almost like the umpire at Wimbledon or something. Do you know what I mean? And it's if you go in there, you actually realize it's a bit more sturdy than that. It's actually built bespoke by the council, by Northumberland Council, I think it was. And it's quite cozy in there. But I went up there because I thought the most interesting thing about Lindisfarne for me was that in-betweenness, that sort of being halfway between being an island and not an island, being a tidal island, and that kind of act of the water severing it, cutting it off, and then retreating, and it's like this umbilical cord that kind of gets cut and then reattaches every so often. I mean, reattaches, it's not a particularly good metaphor, but you know what I mean. But yeah, I sat out there for however long it was, 8 hours or something. I was really careful to make sure no one spotted me, so they didn't try and rescue me. But when you're up there, it is a kind of, you're at this gateway to a holy island, and Lindisfarne in high peak season is so crazy busy. But if you're there, in the middle, kind of in the causeway, in the kind of gatehouse, as it were, it's just total silence, total peace, beautiful views, and just seals kind of swimming up and down the channel. And you maybe there more than in the village, you get a sense of what it might have been for Cuthbert, for Aidan, for those saints who are so important to the story of Lindisfarne.
Mm. Yeah, when I walked over, I heard this sound and I was like, "What is that sound?" And it was the seals singing, which apparently
Mm,
happens sometimes. And then, of course, it's a bird sanctuary as well, so it is
mm,
incredibly beautiful. But you mentioned earlier about the sort of duality of these places, and you did mention there that the village is really busy. And this is one of the interesting things about pilgrimage in general. There is an industry, and I
mm.
guess there always was.
Yeah, yeah.
Chaucer's Canterbury Tales,
Mm,
obviously, there's always been an industry, and I
mm,
found that really hard walking
yeah.
into the village with my wet boots and everything and my backpack. And I was like, and everyone looks at you weird because they've come off a
Mm,
coach. And so, how was that sort of with many of the places you visited, the industry versus the
mm.
spirituality side?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there because you said it was always there. I think it was always there. The commercial side of life is almost impossible to escape in pilgrimage locations. I mean, one example I often talk about is if you go to the square that sort of marks the finishing line of the Camino, and you see these people gathering there, and they're often in extremely heightened states, and some of them are almost euphoric, and it's this extremely kind of beautiful, poignant moment. And then there's the cathedral, which is obviously extraordinary itself. But then parked between the pilgrims and the cathedral, there's often one of those little sightseeing road trains. Do you know the sort I
Yeah.
mean? It's sort of like halfway between a bus and a train, and there's someone on a loudspeaker, and maybe it plays a little song, and it might even have a smiley face on the front of it. But that's standing between the pilgrims and the cathedral, and is just evidence for me of just how people will spy a buck in places where people spiritually gravitate, and that's always been the way. I think it applies to lots of things. It applies to souvenirs, trinkets, pilgrims badges, whatever it might be, rosary beads. I think these are the original gift shops in a way. When pilgrims go somewhere and they want something to take the magic of that destination back with them. But it also applies in terms of the commercial side of things. I think it's to do with, I mean, you said the Canterbury Tales. Like, I think pilgrimage for many people is about boozing and about going out. And if you hear about those stories of is it Edo era Japan, where pilgrimage for many people was just sort of a pretext to go out there and just live the high life and kind of see the world a bit and have some fun. That's one strand of it. I'm not saying that's definitive. For many people, it is a really lofty endeavor. And for a lot of people, I think these two things kind of mingle, sometimes comfortably, sometimes not so comfortably. But yeah, I think the commercial side of things, bathos, these things will always be there. I think these places, they promise escape and transcendence on one level, but then on another level totally fail to deliver that. And
Yeah.
I think it's worth being honest about that.
I think so too. And again, it comes back to what you said about expectation. And in fact, the only place I sort of found that solitude and nature was on the St. Cuthbert's Way because it's so remote in
Mm,
terms of the walk. Whereas then arriving at Lindisfarne. But I wanted to ask you about somewhere else, which is Iona, because I haven't
mm,
been, and part of
mm,
me is kind of scared because of these expectations. So you
mm,
say in the book, more than anywhere I travelled for this book, Iona seemed a place that prompted wild infatuations.
yeah.
Dreams drifted northward to settle on this little Scottish island. So tell us about Iona.
I think here again, it's to do with geography. I mean, I think the fact is for most people in Great Britain, Iona will almost certainly be a long way away from where you live,
Mm.
unless you happen to live on the Isle of Mull or Oban or wherever it might be. It's somewhere that, through our modern eyes, is at one remove from the rest of the world. It's an island, off an island if you count Great Britain as well. It's the edge of the Ross of Mull. It's also kind of it has a different feel to the Isle of Mull, which it neighbours, and which is the route there. It's geologically different. It looks kind of different, and the way it's regarded by many people is, this is one of the first Christian outposts in Great Britain, happening around the same time as as Canterbury emerges, and that it's at the wild edge of the world, this kind of little perch on the cusp of the Atlantic, which is kind of untrue in terms of history, because Iona was actually very well connected. It was close to Ireland in those times. The way of getting around was not by land but by sea, and it was on a kind of fairly established network of sea roads. But I mean, yeah, that doesn't stop the fact that it's sort of seen as a sort of wilderness pilgrimage in many ways. And there is no way getting there is easy. You will have to get a ferry, or you have to get to Oban for a start, which could be umpteen train connections through riding the West Highland line through beautiful glens, a ferry to Mull, another wild road across Mull, which is kind of only just very slightly wider than your car, possibly narrower. And then you get to another ferry port, and then you get a lot. So by the time you got there, whether you like it or not, you've made a kind of pilgrimage of one sort. So I think that those are some of the reasons why. I mean, and of course, it's hugely historically significant. It's where St. Columba, one of those early Christian saints of the British Isles, established his monastery, whatever it was, the 7th century, I think it was. It's at the very beginning of the story. It has the same elements as many pilgrimage sites across Britain, which is they were destroyed by reformations of one kind or another, and so that the ruins are often part of it. And some people might find that kind of disappointing. Perhaps people from a Roman Catholic background might go there and see things being smashed to rubble. But I think perhaps in England, maybe we're a bit more conditioned to find some kind of poetry in that when we think of Walsingham Abbey or Glastonbury Abbey or great monasteries like Rievaulx and Fountains and places like that. They almost have their own kind of majesty in decay. And there's an element of that, I think, about Iona when you get there and you just sort of see these kind of slightly weathered, pieced back together Christian crosses. There is certainly there's something stirring about all those things, I think.
Mm. And I guess one of the other things about it is where it is physically, as you said. So for people listening who don't know the geography, sort of very northwest.
Oh, yeah.
Realistically, you've got a lot of weather arriving. So, and I think you were there for a week, right? So how was the weather? How was that sort of wildness around it?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those places that you can go and stand on a west-facing cliff, and you will have the kind of entire Atlantic blowing up down your face, and you sort of almost get this kind of facelift from quite how intense it is, and that's hugely stimulating. And some people in the community there, community with a big C, the religious community in Iona Abbey today, someone said that's almost like an image of God. This kind of sea, which is all powerful, which it is vast and unknowable, and it has that kind of element of the divine, of the Almighty about it. I'd say that's certainly part of it. And then the origin story of Iona, of St. Columba coming from Ireland and sailing in this tiny weeny little coracle across these insanely wild seas. These are kind of real Channel 5 trawlish program seas where they're just flinging around boats, and it's all rags of white surf. It's not something we're used to if you live near the English Channel or the North Sea or even the Irish Sea. They're not quite on the same scale. I think all those things are part of Iona's appeal. I mean, it is a hugely historically significant place. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah, I like that kind of we can't control the weather and we can't control God, and we're sort of trying to find that in that place. But I want to ask you about Walsingham, because there was a point in history when it was a super famous place, and I would bet that many people listening, probably most people listening to this, have never heard of Walsingham. So
absolutely.
You say it's unique in Britain in being a tiny village shouldering the weight of its holy past. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little village in Norfolk, which is sort of, I mean, it'd be wrong to say Norfolk is remote in the context of England, but it's a little bit more out the way. It's kind of part of this bit of land that sticks out into the sea that incorporates a couple of other counties as well. And it's kind of a bit of a holiday heartland as well, some lovely beaches there. And it has a lot of very, very pretty kind of villages with these kind of flint on the facade that makes all the houses kind of quite sparkly and lovely in a way. But it's fascinating that sort of in the midst of this kind of quite quintessentially English, slightly Miss Marple-esque landscape, there's a lovely little village which at the dawn of was it 1060 something, there was an apparition of the Virgin Mary before a Saxon noblewoman. That's a long time before other more famous sites of Marian apparitions like Lourdes,
Lord.
Fatima,
Fatima. Mm.
Medjugorje in Bosnia. This is a good several centuries before all of those. And yeah, the fact is that this tiny little village was one of the kind of major pilgrimage sites of Christendom. It was ranked alongside Canterbury and kind of only a few pegs below Rome. Santiago, it was mentioned in the same breath as Jerusalem by some people that people would go to this little village. There would be royal pilgrimages there. Kings would be going there. And then suddenly the English Reformation happens, and this little place experiences the same fate as all the pilgrimage destinations in England at that time. These monasteries are all taken apart, smashed to bits. The icons, the shrines are destroyed. Suddenly this sort of sleepy village goes back to being sleepy again for another 400 years or so. And it was only at the dawn of the 20th century where the local vicar, Alfred Hope Patton, he decided to kind of resurrect it in a small way. And so when you go to um, Walsingham today, it's a place that kind of, its sanctity is originally medieval. Originally, about 1,000 years ago, there was this Marian apparition, but then you go there and everything looks like something from the start of the 20th century. The church sort of looks almost a bit like a kind of early BBC building or something, and the shrine is conspicuously quite new and shiny, and is only less than 100 years old. And this place has sort of had this sort of second life after its sort of renaissance at the start of the 20th century. I mean, the counterpoint now is that obviously with the decline of church going, that fewer and fewer people are going there. I mean, in the 1930s, there were special trains laid on from London taking people there. Right through the 20th century, coachloads of people would go from their home parish on pilgrimage there. And now those numbers are dwindling. COVID dealt a big blow to the place. And now it's just sort of quietly kind of ticking along. The really fascinating thing for me about Walsingham is how it is, almost, I mean, like you said, a lot of English people will not have heard of this place. And even people in Norfolk will not have probably not have heard of this place. But if you go there, you will find like large numbers of Latin American people who happen to be working in London. You will find huge numbers of Tamil people from Birmingham or from the Midlands, even from London, I mean, the biggest pilgrimage to this place now is the Tamil pilgrimage, where these fields fill up with cars. And this place that kind of, kind of it's in the middle of Norfolk. It's in the middle of kind of Brexit land, and a large majority of people, they're kind of white Anglo-Saxon people. And then suddenly there's this very highly diverse and really quite wonderful little village in the middle of it all. I think that's kind of something quite lovely, really.
Hmm. And I wonder, because you said it looks quite modern, and you
Mm,
also mentioned there the decline in church going, but
mm,
actually there is a renaissance in pilgrimage, and
mm,
people do like visiting. I mean, I'm not a Christian, and I've done several
mm,
pilgrimages, and I feel an attraction to the
mm.
ruins and the great
Yeah,
cathedrals and these things. I haven't been to Walsingham. I'm not attracted to it because
yeah.
maybe it's too modern. So do you
Mm.
think that's maybe one of the reasons it hasn't come back like some of the other
Yeah,
places?
hugely. I think that's really interesting how some pilgrimage places will speak to people of kind of less certain faith, and others don't. I mean, someone asked me the other day for a piece they were writing what I consider to be Britain's foremost pilgrimage destination now. The classic answer would have been Canterbury, or indeed Walsingham would have been a candidate for a lot of British history. And then, Lindisfarne is also important. But I think even though it's kind of second tier in the kind of more historical stakes, I think Glastonbury is the biggest pilgrimage destination now
Hmm.
in Britain, just because it means so many different things to different people. It is of importance to Anglican and Catholic communities, but it also brings in neo-pagan, New Age people. It brings in people who are looking for some kind of nebulous idea of nationhood as well. Those Arthurian legends that somehow this place has a kind of seed of an origin story about Britain embedded within it. But also, I mean, I think there's a legitimate argument that the biggest gathering in Britain, the festival, which happens just a few miles down the road and a few days ago, I mean, that's a pilgrimage for many people. If you look deep, if you kind of look a little bit more closely, you can see that some of those things like the pyramid stage, that was kind of an energy center, and there are pilgrimage elements to the Glastonbury Festival today. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, it doesn't have that ancient kind of draw of Iona, of it doesn't have the wilderness feel of Lindisfarne. It's not got an enormous cathedral at the end of it like Canterbury. And accordingly, while pilgrimage is in Renaissance in many ways, it's being left behind to some extent, I think, relative to those other places.
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to also ask you, so you have almost a call to action at the end of the book about finding Jerusalem in our own backyard,
Mm,
to travel deeper, not
mm,
further, to break through the crust of the familiar, to find the fantastical. So I think this is really important, and you do mention changes in attitude to travel,
mm,
perhaps with climate change and things being a
mm.
bit different now. So how can we do that though? How can we travel deeper, not further, and see things differently?
That's a very good question. I think the way I saw things differently in this book is sort of being in the right place at the right time. If I kind of give an example of that, I mean, every time I, well, not every time, because sometimes you use the M4, but a lot of times when you go on holiday to Devon and Cornwall, you drive down the A303, and there's that horrible sort of choke point near Amesbury, and traffic's crawling really slowly, and it's really annoying. And you look out the window, and you're like, oh, there's Stonehenge, and you're like, oh, hi, Stonehenge, and then you sort of posh on down the road, and then you don't think about it again. Or you might go there on a school trip or something like that, and you might kind of go with your family and not walk past the barrier, and you're like, oh, this is very interesting. And I think that had been my attitude to Stonehenge until I started reading about its modern history as a place of gathering at solstice, about the free festivals, and visited there on one summer solstice event. And you see that its history for many people is not abstract, that it is not a heap of old stones. It's a temple for many people. And the historical sources are so scarce that people can kind of to a large extent make it what they want it to be, and they do. And the lack of a dogma, the lack of a creed about that place means that you're free to kind of complete the picture yourself. And I didn't know. I mean, maybe I was a bit too young to know about the free festivals of the 70s, the Battle of the Beanfield, where Stonehenge was sort of closed off to the outside world because of the parties that were going on there. And I didn't realize that it was kind of reinvented, rediscovered as a shrine about 40, 50 years ago. And now it's just sort of ticking along, but you can still get a sense of those people for whom it was a sort of, they were holy stones. And that had never crossed my mind until I'd been at summer solstice, that I'd read the sources around it. And I think, yeah, that's part of it. Just learning more, speaking to more people, waiting until the tour buses have thinned and when the sun started going down, perhaps, or whatever it might be. Those are often the moments when you start to see a little bit more clearly magic that some of these places possess and were chosen for in the first instance.
Hmm. Fantastic. Well, this is the Books and Travel podcast. So, what are some of the books you recommend about pilgrimage or British travel or anything?
Okay, yeah, probably. If I was to pick one book about British travel of the last 10 years that kind of opened my eyes a bit more widely, it's probably not a particularly original answer, but probably the Book of Trespass. I think that's just a fantastic book that kind of, so much of kind of landscape writing and nature writing is so polite and so reverential and just something that turns that on its head. I really like it. I think it was really fantastic and so much fun. It was a really great book. So I really enjoyed that. In terms of pilgrimage writing, I've not quite finished it yet, but I really enjoyed How Pilgrimage Changed the World by Catherine Hurlock. I think I like it because it's very kind of clear-eyed and sees through an awful lot of the kind of cloud of mystery around these places to just sort through historical facts. That's a really fun one. British kind of landscape books. I mean, I would say probably I think probably every writer has a few kind of holy texts of their own, and probably again, it's not hugely original, but for me, it's um, as I walked out one midsummer morning, which obviously only has like a few pages of England before it starts hightailing over to Spain. But that kind of landscape around the Slad Valley and I mean, I guess not very far from you, really, not
No.
crazy far from you.
And we should
Um,
say that's Laurie Lee if people don't know.
yes, of course, yeah, yeah. That's another really um, that kind of is writing about a place where, it kind of almost jumps out the page at you really, and you feel that you're there in some ways. I really love that kind of classic British travel writing that came out of the um, kind of 70s and 80s. Those are maybe not quite as fashionable now, the kind of um, Chatwin and Lee Fermor and all that stuff, but that's what really kind of inspired me when I was young. And I know that there's a lot of those kind of books are kind of quite flawed in many ways, and a lot of stuff is
Aren't we
made
all?
up. We are all flawed. We are all formed. And of course, making stuff up is very topical right now in the travel writing world. But yeah, those guys get away with it because they could do it so brilliantly and make it feel so real. But yeah, those books are all hugely important to me. I think you can often tell quite how important a book to is how, but by how well thumbed it is. But for me, just I'm just looking up on my shelf now, and I think the most battered book up there is Wind, Sand and Stars by Santi Subari. That's like another like really kind of sacred text for
Classic.
me. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I
Yeah.
prattled on
Oh no, we
for ages
love
now.
books. That's why we're here. So where can people find you and your books online?
My website is oliversmithtravel.com, and my social media handles are Ollie Smith Travel at Instagram and Twitter.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for your time, Ollie. That was great.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for reading the book.